Okay, so this week's Parsha is Tavo, Tavo, when you should come. And the Parsha begins with the mitzvah of Bikurim, the mitzvah of bringing the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple. The farmer would take the first produce of his land, he would put it in a basket, and he would travel to Jerusalem, to the temple. And there was a whole phrase, prayer that he would say in gratitude to Hashem. But we'll go through that shortly. Then later, the Torah describes the dramatic covenantal ceremony that was to take place on Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, where the Jewish people would formally accept the blessings and the responsibilities of the Torah. And finally, we encounter what's known as the tochacha, which is the terrible list of consequences that would befall the Jewish people if they abandoned Hashem and His Torah. So these are the three main areas that I want to discuss this evening. And I'm going to spend probably a lot more time on the first one, excuse me, the one about Bikurim, and how Bikurim teaches us the concept of gratitude and how we're supposed to show gratitude. So the parasha begins, Vayaki Tavo, it shall be when you come to the land that Hashem your God gives you an inheritance, and you possess it and you settle it. You shall take from the first of every fruit of the ground. This is literal translation. And you shall place it in a basket, and you shall go to the place that Hashem your God will choose, which we obviously know to be the temple. Now, the Mishnah in the tractate of Bikurim describes how the farmer identified the first fruits. So he would walk through his field, and you'd see, for example, the first fig beginning to ripen, or the first cluster of grapes, or the first pomegranate, or whatever particular fruit it would be, and he would tie a reed around it, and he would declare, Hare Elu Bikurim, these are going to be, or these are the first fruits. And eventually, when the fruits were ripe, when they'd ripened, he would place them in the basket and he'd bring them to Jerusalem. And again, obviously, to appreciate this mitzvah, we have to try put ourselves in the position of, or in the world of the farmer, in the shoes of the farmer. So any one of us on this Zoom, and today, if we want fruit, we go to the supermarket, all right? Or we go to the greengrocer. We don't generally think about whether it rained at the right time, whether the soil was sufficiently fertile, whether the insects maybe damaged the crop. We don't really think about the harvest. But obviously, years gone by, and of course, it would be farmers today even, their entire livelihood depended upon the land. Right? The farmer, he would plow, he would plant, he waits, he prays for rain, he watched to see the first shoots appear. He would worry about infestation, he'd worry about disease, about wind, about drought. And after months of uncertainty, he finally saw the first fruit beginning to grow. Now, what would be his natural reaction? This is mine. Look how good I did. Wonderful. I earned it. I deserve it. And it's precisely at that moment that the Torah says to the farmer, stop, stop. Tie a reed around the first fruit. And remember that it's not entirely yours. Yes, you worked hard, but you didn't create the soil. No, you planted the seed, but you didn't invent the laws of nature. You may have irrigated the field, but you didn't create water, and etc., etc. So the first fruit is brought to Hashem because the Torah wants the farmer to recognize the true source of his blessing before he begins enjoying that blessing, the blessing itself. And that's why the mitzvah is called Bikurim. From the word Bachur, it comes first. It's that which comes first. And what we first do, what we do first, reveals always what we consider as important, right? What's the first words, or what should the first words be of a Jew that he says in the morning? We all know, Modeh ani lefanecha, I thank you, Hashem. Before we ask Hashem for anything, before we do anything in the day, we thank Hashem for returning our soul. Similarly, the first portion of our earnings should be dedicated and to tzedakah and maisa. The first of our dough, we know, is separated as challah. And similarly, the first fruits are brought to Jerusalem. And the Moda'ani, the first moment of every day, also belongs to gratitude, or that's where gratitude should be. And what the Torah is teaching us is that gratitude shouldn't be just an emotional response, but it has to be a disciplined part of our life. It has to be built into the very structure of our lives, the very structure of our day. Now it's interesting because when the farmer would come up with his bikurim, and it would be a ceremony of giving thanks to Hashem, he doesn't simply just say Todah lacha or Horidul Hashem, praise be to you Hashem. He doesn't just say thank you Hashem for the fruit, but he in fact recites, and it's something you read in this week's Parsha, and it's in fact, if you read it over this week in Shiur, you're going to see that it also appears in our Pesach Haggadah, this paragraph as well. But if I paraphrase, it says, and this is what the farmer would say, bringing his bikurim. He would say that my ancestor Yaakov was nearly destroyed. His family descended to Egypt. We were enslaved. We cried out to Hashem. Hashem eventually redeemed us. He sustained us in the wilderness. He brought us to the land of Israel. He gave us soil, rain, security, and the ability to produce this fruit. Why? Why does the farmer have to now give a history lesson? Right? He's brought the basket of fruit. Just simply say, thank you to Hashem. That's what we need, right? That's what you want. You want him to realize the source of his blessing and to be able to say thank you. So the answer is that real gratitude, I think, requires context. Now, if I only look at the fruit, I might think that the fruit is just a small blessing. It's something very, very small. But if I understand the journey that made that moment possible, then the fruit becomes part of a much greater story, right? The farmer is not just thanking Hashem for the fig or for the pomegranate. He's thanking Hashem for the whole journey, from slavery to freedom, from homelessness to a homeland, from suffering to blessing. And it's a lesson for ourselves, because one of the reasons we sometimes struggle to feel gratitude is that we look only at this particular moment in isolation. Now we see what we have today, but we forget what had to happen to reach that point or to get what we have today. So again, if you think about, and I can go through so many examples, but I'll just give you a couple. A person might, for example, complain about his work, about his job, forgetting that it was only a few weeks ago, months ago, whatever, that he was praying for a job, that he was praying for employment. Or a person may complain about the demands of raising children, forgetting how desperately he or she or both of them were praying to have a child in the first place. No, we can complain about how expensive it is to maintain a home, right? But we're losing sight of the fact that the blessing, we have a home in the first place. And again, we can give so many examples. The mitzvah of Bikurim teaches us to place today and whatever is in front of us today within the context of yesterday or past. And once we're able to remember the journey, then hopefully we're able to recognize the miracle, and then we really are thankful. We really can give the gratitude that Hashem deserves. And in fact, this applies to interpersonal relationships as well. Now also the farmer concludes and he says, and now, behold, I've brought the first fruits of the land that you being Hashem, have given me. And he doesn't, it's interesting, he doesn't say, Hashem, thank you for everything. Right? He doesn't say, thanks, Hashem, but he actually identifies and he specifies the blessing. He says, thank you for this land. He says, thank you for this harvest. He says, thank you for these fruits. And the idea is that just saying a thank you, a blanket thank you, a general thank you, is not going to cut it. We have to be specific, and if we are specific in our thanks and in our gratitude, it comes across as being so much more powerful. You know, if someone does a kindness for us, they do a favor for us, it means so much more to say to that person, thank you for taking the time to phone me when you knew I was struggling, than merely to say, hi, thanks for everything, right? And the same is true for our relationship with Hashem. Rather than just saying a general, God, thanks. We should really think about it and we should try to specify it. Thank you, Hashem, for my health. Thank you, Hashem, for the people in my life who love me. Thank you for the food I have to eat every day. Thank you for the opportunity that I have to earn a living. So when our thanks become specific, blessings that maybe had become unfortunately invisible suddenly become visible again, and we're more aware of them, and we're able to give so much greater thanks. Just going to allude to a midrash, and the midrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a prophet, and he was able to see through prophecy that the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, would eventually be destroyed, and that the mitzvah of Bikurim would therefore no longer be able to be performed, because you need a temple to be able to come up to in order to perform this mitzvah I'm speaking about of Bikurim. And therefore, says the Midrash, Moshe Rabbeinu established that the Jewish people should pray 3 times each day. Now again, I'm not going to analyze the Midrash because we can say that already had come from the forefathers, the idea of prayer. But just going along with this Midrash, that Moshe foresaw that the temple would be destroyed, that there wasn't going to be the opportunity to bring the Bikurim, he therefore established that a Jewish person should pray 3 times. Now, what is the connection between Bikurim, the first fruits, and prayer? And the answer probably is that prayer continues the purpose of Bikurim. So even when a person can't bring the first fruits to Jerusalem, we can still stand before Hashem in prayer and acknowledge that everything we possess, everything that we have, comes from Him. And it's so important to realize that prayer, when we dive into Hashem, and of course, so much of our prayer is dedicated to asking Hashem for what we need, and that's fine. Hashem's there to hear us. He's our Father in heaven. He wants to give us because He's infinitely great, and His power to give is infinite. But we need to understand that prayer isn't only about asking. In fact, yes, in the beginning we ask for our needs, but at the end we say, Modim anachnu loch. We thank Hashem. We say, thank you, Hashem. And again, it grounds us in prayer that sometimes we can become so accustomed to blessings in our life that we fail. We fail to take the time to actually thank Hashem. And as much as I'm saying prayer is about asking and pleading for Hashem, especially as we come into Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, equally, we must be thankful to Hashem. We be able to, in our prayers during the week, on Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, be able to thank Hashem and be mindful of everything that we have, and not to thank Hashem just generally, but specifically to think about it, maybe even to utter it in our prayers. I'll just end on because I've got 2 other topics I want to cover, but the Hebrew words for gratitude are hakarat hatov. And now if you literally translate those 2 words, it means lahakir, hakarat, recognition, hatov, of the good. What do we learn from that literal translation? That the good already exists. The challenge is whether we recognize it, right? It's always there. The tov, everything that comes from Hashem is tov. Ein davara, no bad thing comes from heaven. It's up to our eyes to be able lahakir, to recognize it and to uncover it and to then acknowledge that it's good. And of course, we're thankful to Hashem, but that has to spill over to human beings. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu was so careful not to strike the water or the sand when it came to the plagues, and he gave Aaron, his brother, the duty of hitting the Nile and hitting the sand, because that Nile had protected him as a baby when he was in a basket, and similarly when he killed the Egyptian taskmaster and buried him in the sand came to his aid to conceal the murder. So Moshe was reluctant to hit the water or the sand in gratitude for what these inanimate objects had done for him in the past. And the lesson is so clear. If Moshe Rabbeinu had such sensitivity and gratitude to inanimate objects, how much more so do we have to show gratitude to people who do have feelings, right? To people who live and breathe and all those around us. I said I was going to end, but I'm going to end with this on this topic. Sometimes in life we take people for granted, and often those close to us, and we might say, but that's what that person's supposed to do. My parents are supposed to care for me, my spouse is supposed to support me, my employee is supposed to finish the task, and the list can go on. And perhaps that's true, but their obligation doesn't cancel gratitude. You can still say thank you to the parents, still say thank you to the spouse, the employee, the volunteer. We shouldn't allow the expectation to blind us to kindness. And that's what Bikurim, it's not just how it applied to a farmer at the times when a Beit HaMikdash stood. And we can say, well, we can read a history lesson and we can read about a mitzvah that's become obsolete. Absolutely not. It applies to us now as it ever did to that farmer centuries ago. Okay, theme number 2 is Moshe gives instructions to the Jewish people that after they enter the land of Israel, obviously he wasn't going to go into the land. We know he died before they entered the land of Israel, that the Jewish people were to assemble at Mount Gerizim. These are the two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. And you'd have 6 tribes standing on the one mountain, 6 tribes standing on the other one, and the Kohanim and the Levim would stand in the valley between them, if you can picture that. And the Levim, the Levites, would turn towards the one mountain, Mount Gerizim, and they would proclaim a blessing. And the entire nation, and we read about this, the entire nation would answer, V'amru kol ha'am amen. All the nation would answer amen. They would then turn to Mount Eval and they'd proclaim curse, and again everyone would answer amen. Now we need to understand this wasn't just an ordinary gathering. This was a national acceptance of the covenant. Yes, the Torah had been given, but now that we're into the land of Israel, we're having a formal adoption, if you like, or recommitment to that covenant. And what's quite striking in this ceremony is the sins that are mentioned. So when the Levim read out the curses were or are sins that a person would perpetrate. And the Torah doesn't focus on the most obvious public transgressions. Instead, many of the curses are actual related to acts that are committed in secret. And I won't run through all of them, I'll just give you a few of them. For example, cursed is the person who makes a carved or molten images, and the verse says, and places it in secret, basam basaser. Or cursed is a person who degrades his father or mother. No one else is seeing that. Cursed is a person who moves the boundary marker of his neighbor. Okay, these are just a few. So why emphasize the secret sinner? Why is it that the sins done in secret are the ones that are publicly announced, proclaimed by the Levim, and the rest of the nations have to answer amen? And the answer is that society can police public behavior, courts can punish visible wrongdoing, the police can catch the person, the court can convict. But there's another dimension of morality that no court obviously can fully supervise, and that's what a person does when no one else is watching. And this covenant at these two mountains teaches us that Torah is not merely a public performance. It's a commitment that must reach the hidden parts of a person's life, right? The part of us that no one else sees. There's a person that we appear to be, and there's a person we are when there's no audience. And of course, Torah's view is that there shouldn't be this dichotomy. There shouldn't be this difference. It should be the same person outwards in the public that's in private. And it's really in the hidden, in the quiet, where our true character is really found. We know Rambam Maimonides, you're familiar with the different levels that he ascribes to giving tzedakah, giving charity. I won't go through them all. But one of the higher levels is when neither the giver nor the recipient knows the identity of the other, right? Why is being anonymous so precious in giving? Because it takes away the ego, it takes away the person, it takes away the persona. I want to be acknowledged. Look at me, I'm giving. No, there's no plaque, there's no announcement, there's no photograph. You're not going to the shul newsletter. The person gives because he knows someone else is in need. He doesn't need anyone else to know that he's giving. By the way, I'm not saying that public giving doesn't have a place. It absolutely certainly does, because it encourages other people to give as well, right? So there is a place for people to give publicly. But I'm saying the higher part of giving, as Rambam says, is when we give anonymously. And it's that hidden mitzvah that we do when no one else sees, only Hashem sees, that really reveals our inner essence. Okay, I'm not going to go too much more there. Um, Look, I will discuss one more, in fact. It says one of the curses that the Levim read out is, cursed be the one who misdirects the blind person on the road. Now, we have a similar mitzvah. I think I've spoken about it in a previous shiur, is that you're not supposed to place an obstacle before a blind person. Now, of course, that applies on the literal level, but of course, it applies more so figuratively. And it's anyone who is blind in a particular matter, someone who lacks knowledge or information or experience to make a decision, and he's coming to you because he knows you to be an expert in that matter, whether it's finance or whether it's law, whatever the case may be. You have an obligation to make sure you're giving him the best advice that's good for him. You are not allowed to give him advice that's going to be beneficial to you, because that is considered about misdirecting, causing a blind person to be led astray. And again, why that also comes into this list of curses is because who's ever going to know your motive, the advice you gave the person? Maybe it was for his benefit. How do you know that it wasn't, that I was doing it for ulterior motives? But Hashem knows. And that's considered one of the things that we do in private, because only Hashem knows what our genuine motives were for doing that particular thing. And that's why it's one of the other aspects that's mentioned in his curses. I will actually mention another one, although I mentioned it earlier, but I will elaborate on it. It says you're not allowed to move the boundary marker, right? So again, more prevalent in days gone by, you didn't have boundary walls, they were like markers, and a person could come along and he could move the pegs or the fences, whatever it is, and no one would really know the difference. But in the meantime, the person has stole a few inches or meters of land, and nobody would notice, right? A very, very small movement, very, very small encroachment. But again, where this applies so much in our times as well, where we're not moving boundary demarcations, a person can also convince himself in life of different things. I'm only taking a little bit. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to suffer. Everyone else does it. I'm entitled to do it. And the idea is no. The idea is not. When you start moving the boundaries, it becomes a slippery slope, and it's never going to just remain there where it is. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on to the third one. I know time's running away, and that's the tochacha. So it's the warning. It's the list of the terrible calamities, tragedies that will befall the Jewish people if they don't keep to Hashem's mitzvahs. Now it begins by saying that you're going to be blessed, your city, in the fields, the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, fruit of the animals. Everything's going to be in the right time. That's if you stick to the plan. I'm paraphrasing there. But if the Jewish people would abandon the covenant, then unfortunately those blessings are reversed and curses come. And they terrible, terrible curses, they're terrible tragedies. But what the Torah is really telling us is that actions have consequences, right? It's not that Hashem's looking to punish us the minute we step out of line, but it's built into the system. In other words, a nation can't abandon justice, can't abandon compassion, morality, responsibility, right, without damaging itself. Society can't normalize corruption, exploitation, violence, indifference, and then expect to remain healthy. Curses are naturally going to come. Spiritual corrosion, erosion is going to come into those circumstances. It's not like Hashem's not punishing. You're not maintaining a healthy, a positive society. What's going to come is going to decay is going to come in that space. If people are no longer trusting each other, well, commerce is going to suffer. The economy is going to suffer. If families break down, children suffer. Again, it's coming down from the microcosm to the macrocosm. These small perpetrations, these small sins are having an effect on the greater society. So we can look at the tochacha, not just simply a description of punishment, but it's a description of what happens when the foundations of a covenantal society are destroyed. Now, of course, there's also why it's such a difficult reading to go through. We do it twice in the year. I've got to think of the other place now. Oh, gone blank now. Oh, the other place at the moment. But we have it the second time now in Dvarim, in Parshat Tavo. And the reason why it makes us tremble is because unfortunately some of these things that are mentioned in these verses, we can look throughout Jewish history and see that it's come to fruition, unfortunately. Now the Torah speaks about exile. Hashem is going to scatter you amongst the people from one earth to the other. Speaks about insecurity among those nations. You're not going to find tranquility. There's not going to be rest for the sole of your foot. It describes fear. Your life will hang in the balance before you. Now, I'm not going to spell out all the pogroms and all the inquisitions and holocausts that have happened to the Jewish people, but unfortunately, many of the verses, many of the things that we're going to be reading about in Parshat Kitavo, the Shabbos, seem to be things that really have come to before the Jewish people. What we need to understand, though, is we're still reading it, right? And let me explain. We come twice a year and you read these tochachot. I'm going to remember where the other one is, hopefully before the end of the Shiur. But we're still here to read it, right? All the other societies, all the other great empires, the Egyptian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the Assyrians, have all fallen by the wayside. Yes, we're reading about tragedies that have befallen our nation, but we're still here to read it. We've still got a Sefer Torah. We're still in shul together with our brethren, together with our fellow Yids, and we're reading the Torah. And that should tell us that there's, in fact, happiness in the sorrow that makes sense. Yes, unfortunately, we've gone through this. We don't understand why. And Hashem will one day explain to us why everything had to happen the way it did. Until that time, we can't explain many of the terrible things that have happened throughout Jewish history, but we're still here. There needs to be a joy even in that sorrow, even in the difficulty of reading the verses, in the recognition and the appreciation that we're still here as a nation, this hated nation that was persecuted by all these powerful nations of old, and yet they doomed to the history textbooks. We are still a vibrant and living nation throughout the world where these nations wanted to scatter us. Now, I'll end with this. Again, I'm sorry I've run over time, but the verse interestingly tells us why do all these calamities befall you? Why will they befall you? It says, Tachat asher lo yavadata Hashem Elokecha, because you didn't serve Hashem your God. But it doesn't end there. It says, Tachat, because you didn't serve Hashem your God, it adds the word joy. You didn't serve Hashem with joy and gladness of heart when you had an abundance of everything. That's how the pasuk continues. So the whole verse, because you didn't serve Hashem your God with joy and with gladness of heart, when you had an abundance of everything, that's why. And at first glance, it might appear quite harsh, quite severe. The the Torah is not saying that the Jewish people completely abandoned the mitzvot. It says they didn't serve Hashem with joy. Now, we can ask, can not serving Hashem with joy really be so serious? I'll just point out to this, the Rambam at the end of the laws of Lulav, we're coming to Sukkot, please God soon, when Rambam speaks about Hilchot Lulav at the end, um, and he says that the joy with which a person performs mitzvahs and expresses the love of Hashem is itself a form of divine service. So yes, we have to serve Hashem, but the way that we serve Hashem, says Rambam, is in itself a form of avodat Hashem, service of Hashem. So it's important that we do it out of joy. I'm going to end with this, and I'm going to say it's so important for us to always be carrying our Judaism with joy. Not to say it's schwer to be a Yid, it's tough to be Jewish, or I've got kosher, or I've got Shabbos, or I've got all these things. But if we can portray a love of Yiddishkeit, a love of Judaism, to really see it for the privilege and for the honor it is to be chosen by Hashem for a particular mission in this world, imagine if our children, right, and many of us have already grown up children, but imagine if our children were to always hear us say, Shabbos again. Oh, when the Shabbos going out? Or damn, this isn't kosher. Or geez, do I have to go to shul? Shul's so long. They're associating, it's all very well we telling them you have to go to shul, you have to light candles, you have to eat kosher. But if everything associated with those things they're so supposed to be doing is associated with the kvetch and a moan and oi, we have to be doing it, well, that's the same attitude and associations they're going to have. So we have an important duty, and maybe it's an important learning we have from this paragraphs, the many paragraphs of the tochacha, of these rebukes, of these curses that will come to the Jewish people, is that we have an important responsibility to serve Hashem with joy, to make it obvious to everyone who sees us as a Jew that we're proud, that we're happy to be a Jew, and that we take that forward. And if we can do that, then the plague that we have amongst us of assimilation, right, will please God. Please God will not see it as a burden to be Jewish, but as a blessing and as something joyous. That's, please God, something that we can take forward. Maybe it's a resolution we can take forward as we head into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not only to take on the performance of another mitzvah, which is great, but as Rambam is saying, realizing that our service of Hashem, how we serve Hashem, is actually itself a service of Hashem. So yes, you might take on, you're going to keep kosher if you're not keeping kosher already. But make sure you're doing it with love. Don't go and say, oh, the price of kosher chicken. And you might be right. Kosher chicken might be expensive, but so is so many other things expensive. We're doing it because Hashem asked us to do it. We have Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King in heaven, who's given us this tremendous privilege to do. Let's show him how happy we are in serving him and doing what's good. So let our resolution be yes, to take on additional things, but to take them on besimcha, with joy and happiness, and everyone around us can see that we truly are grateful, we truly are happy, and we truly realize how special we are to be Am Yisrael, to be the nation of Israel. We should all thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Pleasure.